So we've talked about content signals, show level signals. Mike, we'll go back over to you. When you think about data signals, right? You hear the terms deterministic and probabilistic now thrown around with the fidelity of the data. What's the difference between the two, and how would you equate the value to a probabilistic data set versus a deterministic data set?
Yeah, I think it's twofold, addressability and content. I think it's interesting to look at that issue with regards to content, because I think we could treat some of the content signals that we see today as probabilistic, right? They're influenced, they may be, I hesitate to say padded, but the more genres you may attach to something, the more audience you may attract. I think finding signal in that, and then to Dave's point, finding out what of those signals is working, that's the, adolescent stage that we're at now. But deterministic signals, I think, has been maybe an anchor point for us amongst, app owners, distributors that have a relationship with consumers. And that's a good place to start on the audience side. So whether it's, bringing the connection to the audience, whether it's bringing, household addressability, having that anchor in those walled gardens or in those environments that are seemingly fragmented and disparate, you're still able to extract value because of that direct relationship to the consumer. And oftentimes that's the, for brands, the shortest path to activation, sometimes the most efficient. So, in anything that we do, we're never going to get to 100% deterministic. But that balance of deterministic and probabilistic done right is really powerful. And I think that's where we're at now, trying to achieve that balance between what we know, what we can infer. And I think, again, to Dave's point, being able to take the inferences and tie them to outcomes and then be able to start building more reliability on them has been key.
Can I just do a quick, not that this is your panel, of course, but just because I think that we hear lots of stuff at IAB. There's lots of inputs. And yes, I'm under no naive assumption that we've gotten it all figured out, but I have heard that it has gotten better.
I think there's a bit of unpacking we have to do as an industry, though. So there are some perfectly legitimate reasons why the quality of the data in the bid stream doesn't always provide full transparency to the show level. So a good example, we have in many cases distributed sales rights to certain pools of inventory, to certain program titles, to different parties. So when a Peacock or a Paramount Plus does a distribution deal with a smart TV OEM partner, they will often take some sales rights against certain titles. So you have different parties selling different titles, and they don't always have the same level of transparency about what they're selling or how. I do think there's one thing we should all agree on, though, is that if you are buying direct from a large MVPD or streaming service that has a high-quality authenticated user base, you're buying against gold standard data, and everything else is essentially probabilistic, particularly if you're buying, using IP as a connective tissue and you're matching emails with certain attributes via an IP address to a device. You could be losing 60, 70, 80% fidelity with each hop. It can be very inaccurate.
But that's for audiences, not for contextual. Yeah, okay. Is there, for the buyers, is there a difference when the ability for you to access it from when you're buying it direct or upfront versus programmatic, or is it still both like, sorry, we can't share either?
Give me some juice.
Yeah, what's...
No, it's
Well, no.
I think if you're buying a sponsorship on a direct platform, sure, you can choose the content, right? I think if you were just to go to a platform and say, I want to buy these shows, typically that you can't do. And that's a big gap between the television world, quite frankly, where you can do that.
And they'll claim VPPAs why they can't do that, or just because they want to bundle? Yeah, I'm curious, do we think it's VPPA, or do we think it's their ability that, like, hey, if we don't have to share, we won't share, because then we can put a lot of other murky stuff in there too.
It's clearly in a seller's best interest to not have to share that information. Yeah. And when they're selling you on their top shows, but what you're getting is everything else, that's to their advantage, because everyone wants the top shows and they can't monetize the bottom shows. So I don't know the technical side of it well enough to know if it is an actual barrier or a decision. In my impression in talking to sales over the years, it's a decision more than a barrier.
There's no technical reason why.
It does seem funny, though, because TV cracked this, right? TV if you want to buy the Super Bowl, you also have to buy a bunch of run of platform. Eventually, you will find out what that run of platform was, but they've figured this out, and I feel like we get these new technologies and these new platforms, and it's like they forget how to package inventory in a way that people want to buy it. And
I think it's partly because we've changed the sales model. You know, in the old world, you were buying direct from a major TV network or a local station group, but now we've distributed sales rights much more widely. I think if advertisers were prepared to pay top dollar for certain placements and then to see reduced pricing for run of genre or whatever it might happen to be, you might see a different marketplace evolving. But even
but
then,
I think we're already used to buying in that. That's why I
Right.
don't understand why it hasn't happened. I get programmatically,
Yeah.
it's going to be way murkier. But when you're direct to partner, it feels like they should be able to mimic some of the things that allowed them to monetize lower value inventory while still being able to buy specific programming.
It seems like it comes. Markets have a way of eventually becoming efficient. So like it seems that over time, you're like, as a buyer, I'll pay you more if I know what it is, and I'll just buy more of the other stuff. Like the price discovery will happen. So, but with less discovery, I'm just going to assume the worst. So.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why there's still $50+ billion in linear television, right? That could find a home in other places should the market adjust.
I think it's also the publishers we're talking about, what I was referring to also are the Peacocks, the Hulus, the Disney Pluses that have a traditional TV business as well. And for years before streaming became a thing, they always bemoaned the fact that they were selling show specific, day part specific, where money was going to Google or Meta, wasn't Meta back then, but whatever. And you just didn't know where anything was running. It was just running in the wild world of Meta, and it was an unfair playing ground in their view. So CTV is somewhere in the middle, and it gives you a, I feel like I'm defending the publishers now, but there is a security in, I know, and everything on Peacock is premium to some extent versus a YouTube versus a Meta or whatever. So there is some safety in that. So I think that's like a step in the direction, but it needs to be more transparent. We need to really understand exactly where we're airing.